All right. You're welcome.
Thank you. My favorite line is always, what time does 12 o'clock meeting start? And in Louisiana, it unfortunately never starts at 12 o'clock. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. My name is Randy Hayden. I want to thank the Republican Women, thank Pelican Institute for helping participate in this meeting today. Your participation certainly is appreciated. Thank you all for being here. We're going to try to get you out at 1 o'clock. You know, business is money, and money happens when people work on time. So we're going to try to get you out of here on time. The wait staff has already come around and spoke with many of you, but they're going to make sure that you get the correct order while we're speaking. A couple of quick things up front before we get started with the meal. Many of you probably are wondering the purpose of a lot of this meeting, and I've asked Daniel to come and speak because he's really kind of an expert in a lot of areas, number one. Number two, relatively new in the position that he's in back in Louisiana, and I'd like to help get him out to some like-minded people so that they can know a little bit more about him, and y'all can figure out if there's ways that we can all work together. And the other thing, kind of by coincidence, there's an issue going on in Congress that's very complicated but very important to all Americans, and it's the net neutrality issue. And long story short, the net neutrality issue is an issue dealing with the internet and whether or not we're going to have regulation of the internet or whether we're going to have a completely free and open internet. And so if you've been keeping up with the news, you're probably a little aware that Facebook's got some issues, and actually Mark Zuckerberg is going to testify at Congress next Thursday, I believe. There have been issues with Google. There are lots of issues about whether or not the Russians took advantage of the social media aspects that America offers its people and the freedoms that we have through that. And so there's been lots of knee-jerk attempts to try to resolve those issues. And typically what has happened in the past is that they were resolved at the Federal Communications Commission. And the Obama administration had a Federal Communications Commission that set up some very onerous, stringent regulations. The Trump administration came in and they overturned those. And the Democrats in Congress and some Republicans have looked at passing legislation that would regulate the internet, regulate communications. And Senator Kennedy, our own Senator Kennedy, has kind of been one of the literally three most important people on the globe regarding that issue. And he recently introduced some legislation that would say, we need to know the rules that we're playing by. And we need to know how it's going to affect Americans, and we need to know how it's going to affect Louisianians. And if we change the rules every time we get a new president, that's no way for the internet to expand and business to grow. And so his idea is we need to have some set rules and regs that Congress can set and everybody can agree to. And so we've got some sheets in the back that basically say, thank you, Senator Kennedy, for taking a bold and courageous and leadership role in that. I'm not trying to pin Daniel on that, but part of the reason that he's here is he's very familiar with this issue, and he can tell you way more about the details than I can. But he also has other issues that he'd like to speak with. So we're going to have a quick meal, and then Daniel's going to come up and speak, and Connie Bernard's going to introduce him. Appreciate all the help that Connie has done. But Daniel's going to speak. He'll offer some questions and answers, an opportunity, and then we'll try to get you all out of here by 1 o'clock. If you would, though, please, before we get started, let's say a prayer and bless the meal. Heavenly Father, you are a great and gracious God, a powerful God, all-knowing God, and one that helps us with direction in life. And so we come to you with prayers of praise and thanksgiving. We ask for guidance of our leaders. We ask for leaders that will look to you for guidance. Father, we pray for this food. We ask that you bless it, that it strengthens and nourishes our bodies, and that it helps us continue to serve you. We pray these things in your Son, Jesus Christ's name. Amen. Enjoy your meal. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. I want to acknowledge the groups that helped us to publicize the event, the Republican Women of Baton Rouge. I think also Miss Joyce LaCour from the Pachyderms helped us a little bit, and Woody Jenkins from the Republican Party here in Baton Rouge. Daniel Erspamer is the CEO of the Pelican Institute for Public Policy, and most of you probably already know him and know his organization, but they are Louisiana's free market think tank and the voice for workers, taxpayers, and citizens who believe the best pathway for prosperity and a high quality of life for every citizen in Louisiana is to remove government barriers to free enterprise, promote policies that create jobs and opportunity, and ensure access to quality education for every kid. And I'm going to bring you Daniel now without any delay. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie, and everyone for putting this together, and thanks for taking some time to be here. You know, public policy affects our lives in deep ways, and sometimes we focus on different aspects of it, whether it's politics or lobbying or other, but we want to really look at the broad space of how freedom and free enterprise can really turn our state around and bring jobs and opportunity back to Louisiana. So I want to start by asking you to think about 4 numbers. So the numbers are 6, 1934, 521. 6, 1934, 521. I'm going to come back to those in just a moment. We'll see if anybody can guess what those mean. As was mentioned, my name is Daniel Erspamer, and I'm the CEO of the Pelican Institute for Public Policy. Many of you may have worked with my predecessor, Kevin Hayden, a good friend of mine, and I'm honored and humbled to be taking the helm of the Pelican Institute, this organization that Kevin built. For those of you who don't know, Kevin passed away in October of 2016 after a long fight with cancer. And we really do miss him, but he built this organization that exists as the voice for freedom, free enterprise, free markets in the state of Louisiana, from that principled policy point of view, to be that North Star for citizens, for legislators, and for all of us who care about turning the state around in a really big and meaningful way. And so, that's my charge here as I lead the Pelican Institute into its next phase of existence. Another of my team members, Allie Rao, Allie, if you want to wave hello, is here as well. Allie has just joined our team in the last few weeks, and we're really grateful for her as well. So thanks for being here. All right, let's get back to those numbers. So 6 was the first number, right? All right. Louisiana is the 6th most broadly and onerously licensed state in the country. We require occupational licenses. And many of you, especially if you're paying attention at the legislature today, in the last couple of days, have seen this play out. Julie Emerson has been going toe-to-toe with some folks in the legislature over this. What does this mean? It means there are 122 different jobs in the state of Louisiana that require you to ask permission from the government before you can do them. Now, these are really dangerous jobs, right? These are the jobs that the government says, look, this is so important and this has such an impact on public safety that we're going to require you to pay money, to pass tests, to go through a board, by the way, which is often, as you probably know, made up of your potential competitors. What a business if you can get in it. These are such dangerous positions like florists, like auctioneers, like interior designers, assistant shampooers and hair braiders. Many of these jobs that we just mentioned require more training, more money, and more time than to become an ENT here in the state. Let's be honest about what licensure regimes are. These are cartels designed to keep competition out of your business. So this is groups who are going to the government to say, we're going to need you to keep our competitors out. So we would like to have a fee that's pretty hefty. We would like to have a requirement of testing and training. It requires almost as many hours to become an assistant shampooer as it does to become a full-fledged cosmetologist in this state. If you followed and let's be clear, these are low-wage jobs. These are entry-level jobs often, and these are folks who are just looking for some employment. Sometimes it's side jobs to help raise a family. These are really important, and they're complicated issues, but we've got to cut through the rhetoric. This is about government getting in the way of people finding a job, and this has to change. It has to end. And when you listen to the debate in the legislature coming up, let's just keep this in mind. The arguments that you're going to hear almost all end up in the same thing, which is we don't trust people to make decisions about the individuals and businesses that they frequent. And so the government has to stand in the way and tell you how to do it. And let's also remember we crowdsource everything today. Yelp and TripAdvisor and you name it, OpenTable, all have ways for us with the click of a button or the click of a mouse to find out exactly what our fellow citizens think of something, right? And so these government regulations are not only onerous and wrong, they're obsolete. It's time we make this change. The work that we've already seen with Julie Emerson and some others is really good and really important. The Pelican Institute has also introduced a concept which is called the Right to Earn a Living Act. This will be heard. Their bills were introduced in both the House and the Senate, and they'll be coming up for hearings over the next couple of weeks. The Right to Earn a Living Act, which has been implemented in Arizona, does this. It requires agencies over a 12-month period to review all licenses on the books and make the case of whether something is legitimately a health and safety concern. If it's not, the license has to go away. After 12 months, after our friends in government make this review, if you as a citizen are not satisfied with their decision, you have the opportunity under this law to petition the agency to remove the license. If you are not satisfied with their answer, this actually gives you a pathway into the courts to give some meaningful teeth and will change some of the jurisprudence on these issues. The courts treat these kinds of challenges in a really odd way, and the burden of proof is really high to try to get something changed. This changes the way that works here in the state. So we're really excited about it. We support any step forward that removes burdensome restrictions on people's right to earn a living. And we'll be working on the Right to Earn a Living Act over the course of the next couple of months, hopefully. All right, who can remember the second number? 1934. All right, anybody have a guess?
Title II just passed.
There we go. So Randy mentioned net neutrality. So the 2 years under which we lived under the Obama administration's net neutrality rules, this means your internet service was governed under something called Title II of the Federal Communications Act. This was passed in 1934 to regulate copper wire telephone industry. So think Ma Bell, right? And this is the regulation that the Obama administration used to regulate our internet. Let's just let that sink in for a minute. We used a law passed in 1934 to regulate something that wasn't even a possibility, wasn't even in the realm of understanding then, and we're going to use that to try to regulate the internet. Here's the other way I like to think about it. Anybody ever played the game Monopoly? Right? Do you remember the little spots on the Monopoly board that are called Waterworks and Electric Company? Right, those are public utilities. What this previous effort of net neutrality regulation did was regulate the internet like it was Waterworks or the electric company. So there would be another little spot on the Monopoly board under this that was internet, right, or internet service provider. Now, for those of us in Louisiana, I live in New Orleans, let's just think for a minute about how well our electric company and waterworks function. I just lived through, I've lived back in New Orleans. I'll tell you a little bit about my story in a minute, but I moved back to New Orleans about 8 months ago, and we've been under 3 boil water advisories in that period of time. I don't know about you, but I don't want my internet regulated under that same way. So thankfully, Chairman Pai of the Federal Communications Commission has led an effort to successfully roll back those regulations. And the good news is this: it's gone well. Investment in the internet has once again opened up. We're headed to 5G technology, which was stalled under the net neutrality regulations, and it's given us the opportunity to come together to have a discussion about, as Randy mentioned, what are the meaningful rules of the road that should exist for the internet. The previous attempt at regulation was not only bad, it didn't work, and it didn't actually accomplish the things that they said it would. So it's very good news for this country that those have been rolled back. And now we can actually have this conversation, as Randy mentioned. Senator Kennedy is right in the middle of it, about what should the rules of the road look like. And as we go through this debate, I just want to plant a couple of things in your minds as you think about this. Self-driving cars, remote medical technology, robotic surgery. A lot of this is going to be done through the internet. Now the question we'll have to ask is there a difference between the internet traffic going to self-driving cars, remote medical technology, and me watching cat videos on the internet? I don't really watch cat videos on the internet. But these are the kinds of things we have to tackle, right? We have to really understand what is the future of the internet and how really think through what the regulatory and legal environment around that should be, and make rules to that. Not as you might have heard from our friends on the other side of this, that do what they really cleverly call net neutrality. So let's have that debate. Let's really understand what can allow freedom and free enterprise to flourish. What has been the #1 driver of economic growth in this country over the last decade? The internet. These regulations under Title II were nothing more than an attempt to regulate. The old Reagan quote about if it moves, tax it, right? So this is just an effort to stop something that has been enormously successful and prosperous over the last few years. This is really important. I'm glad to have the opportunity to work on it and talk about it some more. All right, does anybody remember the next number? 500. 500. Anybody have a guess? Nope. 500. 500 are the number of net jobs created in Louisiana in 2017. 500. Does anybody have a guess at how many Texas created in the same period of time?
5,000.
240,000.
Jeez.
Anybody have a guess about Florida? 150,000. If this isn't the starkest, most important reminder about what is wrong with the policies of the state of Louisiana, I don't know what is. The rest of our country is growing. We were one of only 3 states to either essentially not grow or shrink just a little bit. North Dakota was one, as they sort of come off the high of the fracking explosion there, and Alaska is the other, which is a whole other set of oddness. They have a state bank in Alaska. We talk a lot about Alaska. We actually have industry and culture and people. There is absolutely no reason that we shouldn't be experiencing significant economic growth, except for the policies that govern our state. Our state is broken, my friends, and everyone in this room knows that. And we have to turn it around. We just have to, or else we're going to continue to see the kinds of exodus to that I think Scott has deemed Texodus, and we're coming to Flexodus. Many of you saw Governor Scott, great guy, governor of Florida, came to Louisiana on a trade mission to recruit businesses to come open shop in the state of Florida. This is what it's come to, right? We have to turn that around. And this ties to my last number. Who can remember what it was?
60.
Oh wait, that was the first one. 21. There it is. 21. Anybody have a guess? 21 is the percent. 21% is how much state spending grew since 2016.
21%.
21%.
This state.
In Louisiana since 2016. So as you listen to the debate about whether or not we need to raise taxes on our citizens once again, I want you to remember that number. What are the drivers of that number? There are lots of things. The governor's expansion of Medicaid to able-bodied working adults is one. That's a huge expansion, and we haven't even seen the real costs of that come to bear. If you think it's bad now, add $1 billion to that number in the next several years. $1 billion in state general fund revenue we're going to spend. So when we think about what to do about the budget crisis, you've heard the fiscal cliff. The numbers started at 1.2 billion-ish, and then we've winnowed that down to 930 some odd million. And so then we have the other great thing, right? So the rest of our fellow Americans are experiencing wonderful benefits from tax cuts. We get just a slice of that because our income taxes went up. And there are a couple other states where that happened, where just the way mechanics of the tax reform, you know what those states are doing? Looking at how they can cut taxes so that their citizens get the benefits. What's our state doing? Praising everything that we have $300 million extra to try to close this tax loop. It's a tax increase, folks. This is a $300 million income tax increase you and I have already experienced. And legislators, if you watch any of the special session, what did they say? No, we're not doing that until we get an income tax increase. We've already had one. $300 million worth of income tax increase. So as you think about what's coming in the fiscal cliff and the debate that's going to come, they've already started talking about the next special session. Let's be clear. A special session only exists to raise your taxes. Our work over the next 2 months is to help legislators understand we don't want our taxes raised once again. That we can, in fact, it will be hard, there's no question, but can, in fact, cut and prioritize our way out of this. We have to. If we continue to raise taxes time and time again, we'll see that measly 500 new job growth start to go negative in very, very short order. We have to turn things around, and it starts right now. We have to put up a fight. When I started talking about this 8 months ago, and Scott can attest to this, he may have been one of the, Scott McKay of the Hayride here, may have been one of the only other people talking about this. I went around town and said, all right, let's gear up for a tax fight. We've got folks who want to raise taxes, and do you know what folks told me? Even conservatives. Nah, we just need new taxes. There's no fight to be had here. And I couldn't believe it. We're supposed to believe in limited government and lower taxes and individual freedom and prosperity and free enterprise, and everyone was resigned to the status quo. And I think we're starting to see that change now. We're starting to see the tide turned, and I implore you to go out and help turn that tide some more. Encourage your friends and neighbors. When you go to the precinct meetings, when you have the pachyderm meetings and the women's Republicans meetings and everything else, talk about the need to do this. We have to turn the tide on this. We have to not be satisfied with the status quo. We can do this. We can balance this budget, as we're constitutionally required to do, without asking taxpayers to pay another dime in taxes. It can be done, but it's hard work, and it takes our legislators understanding that the ones who want to be on our side have cover, right? That they know people back in their district support this. And for the ones who may be on the fence or having a hard time coming to our point of view, to hear back from their constituents that they're tired of new taxes and they want meaningful solutions to prioritize and cut government. And I'll close with, and we'll head into Q&A here, but one tool I want to make sure everybody has on their radar as we head into this effort to try to rein in government. Has anyone heard of Louisiana Checkbook? Good. Louisiana Checkbook. If you haven't, make sure you go to louisianacheckbook.com. This is going to be a great new tool. If you look back at the special session, this passed in slightly different forms unanimously in both the House and the Senate. It's literally the only thing everyone could agree on in a special session. Now, they weren't able to get it actually done for a variety of reasons, but that doesn't mean this should go away. Our state needs meaningful transparency. And the idea behind Louisiana Checkbook is this. We should have access to understand how every single public dollar is spent in the state of Louisiana. Seems like a fair idea, right? And what you'll hear from the governor and some opponents to this is, yes, that's right, we agree with transparency, but it's going to cost $30 million to get it done. $30 million on top of $90 million we've already spent to try to do this. I'm here to tell you this costs about $250,000 a year. That is far less than $30 million. $250,000 a year will get us access to every single expenditure so that we as taxpayers, we as working families, we as active citizens can really understand where our dollars are being spent. And part of the challenge we have in the tax cuts, or excuse me, tax increase versus, when I'm talking about tax cuts, tax increases versus spending cuts debate, we don't really know where the money's being spent. Louisiana Checkbook, if you haven't looked at it, please go to louisianacheckbook.com. This is based on what's already been done in Ohio, where they have not only every state dollar available, and if you go to ohiocheckbook.com, I encourage you to, after lunch, pull it up on your phone or on your computer. It's amazing. It's really easy to use. You don't have to sort through all sorts of gobbledygook. You find out not only where every state dollar is being spent, but 1,000 different localities who have joined their movement in Ohio as well. Can you imagine the power in our hands if we had access not only to every state dollar, but every local parish, school board, municipality dollar in the state? I will tell you the Lafayette Parish School Board has already agreed to do this. They're actually stepping out ahead of the state and have already signed the contract to put every dollar from their checkbook online. This would be very exciting. We need other localities to do the same thing, and of course the state to do it as well. This is really important. It's not going to solve all our problems, obviously, but it's a really critical tool to get us from here to where we need to go. And I'll close with this. Things may seem hopeless. Things may seem like they're never going to change. We have been stuck with the Huey Long era government for far too long, and the status quo is deeply, deeply entrenched. And why? Because everyone gets a piece of the pie. And when everyone has a piece of the pie, it's awfully hard to get them to agree to take it away. We've a lot of folks who, I'm a conservative, but I like this one thing I get, or I'm a conservative, but this one license is really, really important because it's in my industry, and I don't want any more competition. Right? We have to change that. We have to agree that to make a better state for our kids and grandkids, to turn the tide, to stop and to bring jobs and opportunity back to Louisiana, we all have to come together and change the way things are done. And I mentioned that I've been here just for back in Louisiana for the last 8 months. I spent the last 15 years essentially traveling around the state, parachuting into big fights, helping folks build a battle plan and build an infrastructure and go out and accomplish some big things. Things like collective bargaining reform in Wisconsin, undermining the power and political influence of public sector unions there, which no one thought could ever be done. Right to work in Michigan, the birthplace and home of the union machine. No one ever thought it could be done there. Repealing, for only the second time in our country's history, a personal income tax in Tennessee. No one ever thought it could be done. Fundamental tax reform in North Carolina. No one ever thought it could be done. Meaningful education reform in Wisconsin and Colorado. No one ever thought it could be done before. The good news is I've sat in this room just like this, and where people said it could never be done before, and then I got to come back to them a couple years later and said, we did it. And so I believe the same thing's going to happen here. I've got 4 kids. We've moved our family back to the state. We are here to stay. There will be no parachuting back out for me in this particular venture, and I'm really excited about it. And I do believe things can change. I know they can. And we're here to deploy that very same playbook with our own peculiarities, just like everywhere, to really turn the tide here in Louisiana, to build a movement for freedom and for enterprise that will last beyond just an election cycle or two, and that will meaningfully turn the policy here to bring jobs and opportunity back to Louisiana. So I'm really excited about everything that's going on. I'm happy to do some Q&A or engage in some conversation about some of the state level issues, some of the federal level issues, net neutrality and others, and really grateful for your attention and for all that you do. Thank you.
Please repeat the question.
Sure. So any questions, comments? I know we're hungry and they'll bring. Yes, sir.
Since no one's going to volunteer, what can we do? I'm a CPA with about 40 years experience plus. what can we do with the Louisiana Department of Revenue? Other than you can't get a hold of them on the phone. They seldom give you a place to write. They farmed out their collection to California. And it basically, they're incompetent. I mean, I've dealt with Texas Department of Revenue. Just briefly, if you'll give me about 2 or 3 minutes. I had a client who had a sales tax number to go to a Texas convention. And it was supposed to file quarterly sales tax. They didn't, because they didn't make any sales. Sure enough, 6 months, 9 months, a year later, they get a letter for $1,000 of taxes because they had not. I called them up, and I talked to the guy, and I said, we didn't make any sales in that. He says, you want me to cancel this number? I said, no, they're probably going to go back to the same thing next year, so we'll keep the number. He said, okay. He said, well, okay, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll put you on an annual filing. You only have to file once a year, January 20th. I said, oh, that's great. I said, what about all of the fees we owe for not filing and all that? He said, oh, I've taken care of all that. I said, really? He said, yes, sir. And I said, okay, so, I said, you know what I'd have to do in the state of Louisiana to get this? I'd have to file every quarter we hadn't filed with zeros. I'd have to write a letter requesting abatement of all the penalties. I'd have to write a letter requesting we be given an annual filing rather than quarterly. And other than that, that's what I'd have to do. And we wonder why Texas is getting all that, because the state, we are paying a ton of money to get people to come in, and the Department of Revenue is running them out quicker than we can get them in. And another thing that upsets, that I just recently dealt with the Department of Revenue, you know, if you don't file your state income tax, you can lose your fishing license and your driver's license. Not a big deal to most of us, but if you're a trucker and you get stopped in Northeast Arkansas, they take your truck, you got to get home on your own, and then you've got to do whatever the State Department of Revenue says and the Department of Motor Vehicles to get your license back and to go get your vehicle and go make a living. Now, the law doesn't say if you don't file, you lose your right to make a living. It says you lose your fishing license or your driver's license. They'll also do that to shrimpers that are anybody out there. So, I mean, we'd have a slew of incompetent people. We've got too many lawyers who never left the building, and we then make them head of the Department of Revenue, which I felt some hope for, because I said, oh God, we're getting a lady who is a tax attorney. She'll understand the law. Maybe she does, but she doesn't understand if you send out 10,000 notices and you got 20 people to answer those notices, you're going to be overwhelmed, right?
It's right, and you know, question about there. I'll give you a short answer, I think, to the Department of Revenue question, but then perhaps a broader point as well. You know, I would not hesitate to call my legislator and say,
I did that. I even got him involved. He told us what to do. Motor vehicles said they couldn't do it.
We got
the license back.
Yeah, I would just keep. I don't have a good answer for you other than make sure everybody knows about it.
We've solved the problem, but it took 2 weeks to do it.
Yeah. No, I don't doubt it.
So are we giving government the authority to put you out of business for 2 weeks at any time they want to?
That's exactly right. And look, the point that I've often made, and I know others have too, is as we look at the system here, even if we look at tax and budget and everything else, you know, because what you'll hear some people say is, oh, well, our tax burden is not that high, and all this. And the truth is, there's some truth to that. The reason is because it's so complicated that almost no one actually pays the full tax rate. And let's take the corporate income tax, for example. Right? We have this really high rate. So that if you're looking to let's say you're looking to start a business and you think, where should I locate my business? Well, if you look at the competition, Tennessee, Texas, Florida, even Mississippi, and Alabama, we have a really high relative rate. Now the truth is, nobody pays that. Nobody pays the full rate of that. The effective rate, I think, for most people is closer to 5%. Or 4.5%. CPAs in the room may know this better than me. And so we have this really high rate that is a deterrent to business starting, and yet we don't even collect all that much tax revenue from it. It's a few $100 million in tax revenue. We ran the numbers, for example, if we eliminated the corporate income tax in Louisiana, and let me just make a note, this is done by what's called dynamic scoring. So with any tax bills, if you work in the legislature, you see this thing called a fiscal note, right, where they say, okay, whatever, if it's a spending or a tax bill, the fiscal office will tell you what the impact of that is. Well, what they're doing is called static scoring. So they say there's all these different factors, right? And they say we're going to raise this tax. A static score says, well, if we raise this tax, that's the only thing of this whole algorithm we're going to change. It'll produce this much revenue. What a dynamic score does is it says we raise this tax. Well, it has a tax increase has impact on all sorts of other things, right? So it has an impact on job growth. It has an impact on, depending on the tax, all sorts of different things. So a dynamic score looks at all the different factors involved and tries to give you a prediction about what the impact will be. By repealing the corporate income tax in Louisiana within 2 years. What the dynamic score tells us is that there would be 11,000 new jobs created, and we would increase the gross domestic product for the state by about $1 billion, and we lose on net about $280 million in tax revenue annually. I don't know about you, that sounds like a pretty good deal to me. Right? When we already have a government that doesn't work very well for us, we have something that's complicated and antiquated and impossible to navigate, as our CPA friend has told us. We've got to make government less a part of all of our daily lives. We don't have to spend as much time talking about it. Perhaps they're paying a lower tax rate, but they have to pay lobbyists and accountants and lawyers to try to figure out how to get to that rate. That's a cost of doing business just as much as paying the tax. And so when you hear folks come back and say, well, we have a pretty low tax rate as it is, don't believe them. Don't believe them. It's not true. Because of the complication and the cost of compliance of that is so high. So thanks for making that point. Sorry I don't have a good answer for you, but good luck to you. Other questions, comments, noting? Yes, sir.
Louisiana seems to have more occupational licenses than just about any other state. And one of the big complaints I've heard from people in business, at the local level especially, trying to start a business, is just how damn long it takes to get through the permitting process.
Yeah.
I mean, I know people who are supposed to open, they might be slating to renovate a building and go into business maybe last fall, and they're barely just starting to get work done inside a building because they were waiting that long just to get all the permits. What can be done to help streamline the permit process and reduce the number of permits you need to work jobs that people clearly should not probably require that kind of strict licensing?
Right. Yeah. The question is about occupational licensure. We talked a little bit about it at the very front end, but a couple of things. You're right. When one of the effects of having lots and lots of licenses, 122 different jobs in the state that require permission from the government, not to mention all the business licenses and permits on top of that. One of the side effects of that is it takes a daggum long time to get through the process because there are so many other people who are applying for this. The costs are high. You may have followed the hair braiding debate that happened. It happened last year, happened again a couple weeks ago. Talking to a couple of the ladies who were hair braiders, and the cost is astronomical. They're talking somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000 of investment to try to get all of the requirements that are required to get that license. That is outrageous. I just got back from Disney cruise with my 4 kids, and I walked on the boat, and the first thing I saw was this little stand that said hair braiding. And I thought, I wonder if they have to get a license for that. And then I figure we're out on the open seas, they probably don't have to get a license for anything. But, it's insane. This is, I sat in the committee room and listened to the debate. And you just have a hard time understanding how people can make these arguments with a straight face, and yet they do. you heard someone go up to the table to make a just, bless his heart, passionate claim that there are meaningful and significant safety risks involved with hair braiding. And they talk about knives that are involved, and you just have to wonder, do we just assume that any person who wants to purchase a service or purchase a product, there's no risk at all in understanding what the service they're going to do? Anything. I mean, we're eating food here, and there's a knife at the table. I suppose you could harm yourself, putting butter on your bread. I don't know. But are we going to stop that from happening? Are we going to take away the knives at the dinner table? I mean, you start to go down a path that's so ridiculous you can't imagine it, right? And these are the kinds of arguments you hear against many of these common sense reforms. So Julie Emerson, just to answer the question about what can be done. There's a review bill that has passed the Commerce Committee in the House. It'll come to the House floor pretty soon. There's some specific licensure bills on florists and hair braiders. And then the Pelican Institute, as I mentioned, has put forward an idea called the Right to Earn a Living Act. If you go to pelicaninstitute.org, you can read the brief paper about the benefits this has had in Arizona and what it could do for folks here in Louisiana. All right,
Last question.
Last question, yes, sir.
Last question, yeah. Go.
Sure, you want?
Yeah.
Good
Meeny,
morning,
meeny, miny, mo.
Bailey, 28-year lawyer. I have left the building a few times. 25-year career prosecutor. Your comments have been so refreshing, and I hope some of what you suggest is implemented. My question is about this. I've been interacting with the legislature in one fashion or another for a long time. I hear the rumblings, and they sound to me like they're getting louder and louder for a constitutional convention. Would you comment, if you would, on whether that's a good or a bad idea with regard to, sort of overlaying everything you've talked about?
Yeah, so the question is about the rumblings that have been growing about a constitutional convention in the state. Here's my take on it. We require meaningful fundamental reforms to the way the government is structured. How state and local governments interact with one another, how our tax system is constructed, and how we construct the spending process, the budget. As you may know, of a $30 billion state budget, the legislature only has discretionary authority over about 12% of that, about $3.5 billion. That's outrageous. It's meaningfully outrageous that we elect people to go to Baton Rouge to in part to allocate money to programs, and they have no ability to do so. So as we've looked at the meaningful structural changes that are required, it requires constitutional change. And so one way to do that is to sort of take each of them piecemeal and run a constitutional amendment. That's a lot of time and energy and risk. So I would say I think the Constitutional Convention is likely the only way to actually get it done in a way that's meaningful. But I'll add to that, there's tremendous risk to it.
Yes.
So it's my view on it is I think we have to do it. But I think we have to be really smart about how we proceed with it, how we construct it, and if and when it's called, that everyone in this room and all of our friends and colleagues get really active in the election of delegates to that convention.
And who the conferees are is critical.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Critical, because right now, every legislator up there would love to be a conferee.
So
They would love to have that authority and step in to amend the Constitution. And so that's a sort of a flag I've been waving for a while now, that we need to do everything we can to make sure that ordinary citizens and farmers and business people and lawyers and CPAs and people in this room become the conferees and not folks that have been elected and entrenched for years and years and years.
I have actually suggested an amendment to the current proposal that would bar currently serving elected officials from running for the convention. A compromise that I think helps that, it doesn't go all the way, is to arrange the convention delegates by Senate district. So you would elect three convention delegates per Senate district. And so that way you're at least not, basically just every House district gets a gets a spot in the convention. So it doesn't do what I would prefer, which is no currently serving elected officials, but it does help mitigate some of that and allow a broader space for non-elected officials to be. So I think that's at least a step forward from the current proposal. You're exactly right. It requires all of us to be involved in this. So we'll see what happens as it moves forward. We'll be very involved in that, and we are starting. Sorry, I know we're not. At the end of this legislative session, we'll begin rolling out what the best outcomes of the convention, or whatever the process is to get there, but what should fundamental change really look like.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.